She was forced to marry her sister's blind millionaire fiancé. He thought she was the woman he'd been promised to, until he saw her face and everything unraveled. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Helen Morgan, age 32, stood by the front window of her family's bookstore, pages and memories, listening to the steady patter of rain against the glass. Outside, autumn in Chicago had settled in, the overcast sky reflecting the dull ache in her heart. She smoothed a strand of her light brown hair, which she wore pinned in a messy bun, tucking it behind one ear while her reflection stared back at her. It was a reflection she'd grown used to ignoring. A faded photograph taped to the corner of the mirror caught her eye, one of her twin sister, Rachel, same green eyes and similar facial structure. But that was where the commonalities ended. Rachel's long, perfectly styled hair and poised expression contrasted painfully with Helen's plain features. A faint scar on Helen's right chin, barely noticeable unless you looked closely, reminded her of the time she fell off her bike at age 10. Her mother had fussed over Rachel's sprained wrist that day, leaving Helen's scraped chin an afterthought. That memory still stung. Helen tore her gaze from the mirror and turned toward the bookshelves, inhaling the comforting smell of old pages and polished wood. The bookstore was small, with slanted floors that creaked in places. Still, it felt like home. More so than the grand Morgan residence in Lake Forest. She'd invested years quietly organizing shelves, researching antique copies, and talking to regulars who appreciated the store's warmth. Nobody else in her family seemed to notice the value of her efforts. They treated the shop as a minor relic of a simpler time. Her cell phone buzzed on the cluttered oak counter. The screen displayed Mom, which meant another conversation about Rachel's upcoming wedding. Helen braced herself and answered. "Oh, Helen," came Evelyn Morgan's breathy voice. "The rehearsal dinner is next week, and I need to confirm the floral arrangements. I'm so swamped. You know, dear, Rachel's wedding is the event of the season." Helen pressed the phone closer, hearing more excitement in her mother's tone than she'd ever recalled for her own milestones. "What can I do to help?" she offered softly, mentally preparing for a barrage of tasks. Evelyn rattled on about centerpieces, a potential feature in a local bridal magazine, and the VIP guest list. She never once asked how Helen was doing or whether the store was managing its finances. Finally, Evelyn concluded with, "Just be there on time, dear, and please wear something flattering." When the call ended, Helen exhaled. The hush of the bookstore returned, broken only by the shuffle of her footsteps. She retrieved a stack of rare volumes she'd been cataloguing, antique novels that nobody else in her family cared about. Running her finger across the worn spines, she thought about how Rachel would never touch them, too busy with glamorous pursuits and her life as a lifestyle influencer. Helen placed one of the books carefully on a display table, reminding herself that her skill with rare collectibles brought in a modest but steady income. Suddenly, an envelope with official lettering caught her eye. Past due, final notice. It was addressed to Evelyn Morgan but mistakenly delivered to the bookstore. Frowning, Helen tore it open, her breath quickening when she saw the overdue amount. The family's finances were more precarious than anyone let on. She realized that this wedding, so grand and over the top, might be more than a celebration. It could be a lifeline. Late that evening, Helen settled into the worn leather armchair in her tiny upstairs apartment. The overhead lamp cast a yellow glow against stacks of books lining every wall. She could almost forget the outside world in this snug cocoon. Almost. But her thoughts spun with concern. The mortgage letter indicated real trouble, yet no one had breathed a word to her. Just as she was about to shut her eyes, her phone buzzed. The screen showed Rachel, and a jolt of unease rippled through her. She picked up, but all she heard was her sister's shaky breath. "Helen, I need—" Rachel's voice trembled. Then the line went dead, heart pounding. Helen tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. A feeling of dread settled in her stomach. Rachel always exuded confidence. For her to sound panicked meant something was gravely wrong. Helen's thoughts spiraled. Could this be tied to the overdue bill or something worse? Sleep was impossible now. She stared at the dark city skyline through her window, hugging a cushion to her chest. A single question throbbed in her mind. What had happened to her sister, and why was she suddenly so afraid? The next morning, Helen stood behind the bookstore's counter, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. She'd barely slept after Rachel's cryptic phone call. Despite multiple attempts, she hadn't reached her sister again. The uneasy silence between each ring was driving her mad with worry. Suddenly, the door flew open, letting in a gust of cool air. Evelyn Morgan, at 58, carried herself with the grace of a former model, though her blonde highlights were showing signs of stress. She marched in, ignoring the store's cozy charm, her eyes wild. "Helen!" she gasped. "She's gone!" Helen's heart dropped. "Who's gone? Mom, calm down!" "Rachel," Evelyn said, voice shaking. "She disappeared last night, left her room at our house in Lake Forest empty. The wedding is in a few days, and I can't find her anywhere." Helen's mind spun. She remembered the brief, desperate call from Rachel. Something big must have driven her to leave. "Did she say anything to you at all?" Helen asked, stepping around the counter and gripping her mother's trembling arm. Evelyn shook her head, tears forming behind impeccably applied mascara. "Nothing, dear. Just a note pinned to the duvet. I can't do this. I'm sorry." Then she vanished. The wedding dress is still there. Everything else is gone. Helen couldn't quell the wave of panic that crashed over her. However complicated their relationship, Rachel was her twin. "Have you checked with her friends? Maybe she just—" Evelyn let out a bitter laugh. "We've called everyone we can think of. Her stylist, her manager, her influencer buddies. No one has a clue. Robert is at home, freaking out about the finances." Her mother's voice caught. "He keeps mumbling we're doomed if this wedding doesn't happen." Helen swallowed hard, recalling the overdue bill she'd seen. So it was true. The Morgan family stood on the brink of ruin. "Mom," she said carefully, "we need to call the police if she's truly missing." At that moment, the bookstore door opened again, admitting a swirl of cold air. Her father, Robert Morgan, stepped inside, shoulders slumped in his tailored coat. At 60, he looked older than his years, dark circles under his eyes betraying countless sleepless nights. He peered around the store as if expecting Rachel to appear from behind the shelves. "We can't involve the police," Robert murmured. "It'd ruin her reputation. The press would have a field day. Our business partners—" He trailed off, rubbing his temple. "The wedding was our last hope, Helen. Adrian Reynolds was going to bail us out." Helen frowned. "Bail you out of what exactly?" But before her father could respond, Evelyn's phone rang, filling the air with a shrill tone. She answered, and Helen observed her mother's face contort with frustration. "You're sure?" Evelyn barked, then hung up. "No sign of Rachel at O'Hare or Midway. She's not on any flight manifest. We still don't know where she is." A sinking feeling pooled in Helen's stomach. Rachel had always been unpredictable, but running away just before her wedding seemed extreme, even for her. Had something happened with Adrian? They were rarely seen together in public, given that Adrian seldom left his lakeside mansion since losing his sight 3 years ago. Her father cleared his throat, avoiding Helen's eyes. "You know, we never told you the extent of our money troubles. We lost a lot in bad investments. Adrian's fortune was going to save us." He paused, knuckles whitening. "Helen, we're in real danger if this wedding is called off." Evelyn nodded vigorously. You have no idea. We need Rachel to go through with it. But Rachel's gone, Helen said softly. She tried to imagine the conversation that would occur if they did locate her, Rachel, forced to marry for financial reasons, while Adrian remained unaware of the chaos. Before Helen could utter another word, her mother seized her wrist with surprising strength. You look exactly like her, Evelyn said, eyes glinting with a desperate light. You could step in, just temporarily, until we find her. Adrian's blind, for heaven's sake. He won't see the difference. Helen froze, a wave of horror washing over her. It was unthinkable, fraudulent, cruel to Adrian, and yet, from the fear in her mother's voice, she knew they were truly desperate. Her father swallowed hard, his gaze pleading, Please, if we can't locate Rachel in time, we need you to stand in, just so the ceremony goes on. It'll save this family, Helen. She backed away, her mind reeling. Rachel had vanished, leaving everyone in tatters. Helen's parents were begging her to do the impossible. And somewhere, the reclusive Adrian Reynolds waited, blind to the storm that was about to sweep him under. Helen paced the cramped back office of pages and memories, trying to steady her breath. A single overhead bulb buzzed, casting harsh shadows on the walls cluttered with invoices and dusty shelves. Earlier that day, she'd fled her parents' pleas, needing space to process their outrageous suggestion, impersonate Rachel for the wedding. She still couldn't believe they'd asked her to commit such a deception. A gentle knock on the door startled her. It was her father, Robert, looking exhausted. He closed the door softly and leaned against it. Helen, I know this sounds insane, he began, his voice hushed, but we're desperate. Adrian's wealth is our only way out of the mess I created. She crossed her arms, feeling her pulse race. Dad, this is wrong on so many levels. We'd be lying to him, to everyone. How could you expect me to do that? He massaged his temples, eyes rimmed with red. I'm not proud of asking this, but you know what will happen if we default on our debts. Those people I borrowed from aren't the most forgiving. We've got second mortgages, overdue loans. His voice cracked. We could lose everything, maybe even face threats. Helen's heart clenched. She hated seeing her father so broken, yet it wasn't just about money. And what about Adrian, Dad? He has a right to know who he's marrying. Robert swallowed hard. Of course he does, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But we only need a little time. Your mother and I believe Rachel will turn up. She always does. In the meantime, you're identical twins. He can't see... Please, Helen. Fear, disgust, and a strange flicker of compassion for her parents tangled within her. She pressed her fingers to her eyes, trying to imagine the wedding day. Adrian, presumably guided down the aisle with no idea that the bride at his side was not the woman he'd proposed to. Was that even the truth? She had no idea how deep Adrian's real feelings for Rachel went. As if reading her mind, Robert spoke again. Rachel never really spent much time with him since his accident. She's been busy with her influencer career. This might not even be so difficult to pull off. Helen looked away, nauseous. This is fraud. We have no choice, he insisted softly. It's either that or we're ruined. She wanted to shout, to resist, but an image of her mother's tear-streaked face flashed through her mind. And the memory of that final notice she'd opened. Those kinds of debts didn't just vanish. Helen realized there were real risks involved if they angered the wrong lenders. Her cell phone rang, the screen lighting up with Evelyn's name. A wave of dread swept through her, but she answered. Evelyn's tone was frantic. Helen, we've got everything set. Tomorrow the wedding planners expect us at the final fitting for the dress. You need to show up. Otherwise, we'll never fool anyone. Mom, I haven't even agreed. Don't overthink it. This is life or death for us. The call ended abruptly. Helen's mind whirled. She couldn't breathe. She rushed to the tiny bathroom behind the office, flicked on the light, and stared at herself in the mirror. Her hair was disheveled, green eyes shining with shock. Her reflection reminded her of Rachel's glamorous photos. Except Helen looked haunted, not radiant. She pictured Adrian's face, though she'd only ever seen it in a magazine. 37, they said, wealthy after founding his tech company, and now living a reclusive life after losing his sight 3 years ago in a car accident. How would he respond if he learned the truth? Tears pricked at her eyes. "I can't do this," she whispered, clutching the sink. But an image of her parents' desperation took hold. If she refused, they'd be drowned in debt. The store, her only haven, might be lost forever. Her entire family's livelihood was at stake. The clang of water pipes echoed in the small space, as if punctuating her dilemma. She closed her eyes, heart pounding, and finally whispered a shaky promise to herself. "I'll give them a few days, just until Rachel is found. Then I'm out." Somehow, repeating it made the impossibility feel less crushing. She pushed off the sink, trembling, knowing that by morning her life's quiet stability would be shattered beyond repair. Sunlight filtered through the high windows of the luxury suite at the Peninsula Chicago, catching particles of dust that danced in the air. Helen stood stiffly in front of a large mirror while her mother fussed over her hair. Evelyn Morgan's expertly manicured hands tugged and pinned, trying to recreate Rachel's signature loose waves on Helen's naturally finer locks. "Hold still," Evelyn muttered, her tone more anxious than nurturing. "We have only an hour before the wedding planner arrives with last-minute checklists." Helen's stomach churned. Rows of dresses, swatches of fabric, and sample bouquets cluttered the suite's plush carpets. Sophia Lawson, the fast-talking event organizer, hovered by the door, dressed in a sleek black blazer, tapping away on her tablet. Helen felt like a child playing dress-up in someone else's life. She caught her own gaze in the mirror. The transformation was unsettling. Her usually pulled-back hair now cascaded over her shoulders in carefully sculpted curls. An elegant makeup palette concealed her scar on the chin. Her green eyes, framed with false lashes, looked wider, more uncertain. She wore form-fitting designer clothes that Rachel might choose, clothes that felt alien on Helen's modest frame. Evelyn's phone buzzed. She answered swiftly, tossing an anxious glance Helen's way. "Yes, everything's going smoothly," she lied into the phone. "The bride, Rachel, is adjusting her final look." Then, lowering her voice, she added, "We'll be ready for Adrian's assistant by this afternoon." Helen's chest tightened at the thought of meeting Charlotte Winters, Adrian's long-term assistant, who apparently knew him better than anyone. Would Charlotte sense the deception right away? Anxiety spiked through her limbs as her mother ended the call. Sophia approached with brisk steps, measuring tape around her neck. She eyed Helen. "I'm finalizing the seat assignments," she said. "The rehearsal dinner was cancelled because of the short timeline, so tomorrow is the wedding. Are you feeling all right?" Her gaze was polite, but Helen sensed subtle suspicion there. Perhaps because Rachel's usual confidence was absent, Helen forced a tight smile. "Just nervous. Big day and all." Sophia nodded, apparently accepting that explanation for the moment. "The tailor will be here soon to do a final adjustment on the wedding gown. Let's make sure we handle that quickly, since we're on a crunch." As Sophia swept away, Evelyn turned Helen around to face her. "Remember, dear, posture. Rachel stands taller." She nudged Helen's shoulders back. "And when you speak, try to sound more vibrant, like your sister." Helen's mind whirled with the instructions she'd been given. For days, she'd been drilled on Rachel's mannerisms, her intonation, the way she laughed. She felt like an actress with no script. "Mom, what if Adrian notices? He's blind, but he's not stupid. If he picks up on differences..." Evelyn's face hardened. "He won't, as long as you don't slip up. You look identical, and he's only heard Rachel's voice a few times since the accident." A flicker of guilt crossed her features. "Just get through the ceremony, the first few days. By then, we'll find Rachel. Everything will be back to normal." Normal. Helen almost laughed at the idea. She stepped back, brushing a hand over the satin of the half-open garment bag that contained Rachel's elaborate wedding gown. It was strapless, with intricate lace, more lavish than anything Helen would ever choose for herself. Her fingertips trembled against the delicate fabric. A knock sounded at the door. Margaret Chen, Rachel's longtime friend and stylist, appeared with a garment bag over her arm. Margaret, tall and chic with subtle tattoos, arched an eyebrow. "Hey, Rachel," she said, her voice flat. "We need to try this on you. I brought a backup veil too." Helen swallowed. One wrong word, and Margaret would see right through her. Carefully, she mustered Rachel's friendly tone. "Thanks, Mags. Let's get it done." Margaret blinked, studying her face. "Sure," she finally said, though her posture hinted she sensed something off. Helen prayed she wouldn't push further. After an awkward half-hour of fittings, Margaret packed up her tools. Before leaving, she paused, eyes narrowing at Helen. "You seem different today. Less chatty. You okay?" Helen's throat went dry. She glanced at her mother, who shot her a warning look. "Just wedding stress," Helen managed. "You know how it is." Margaret nodded, but her gaze lingered, as though searching for confirmation. Then she shrugged and stepped out, alone again. Helen felt her pulse pounding. She'd navigated one test, but more lay ahead. In less than 24 hours, she would stand at the altar, reciting vows that weren't hers, and somewhere, the real Rachel was still missing. Helen shut her eyes, her stomach twisting in knots. Tomorrow would either save her family or destroy everything she knew. Helen's heart thundered in her chest as the church doors swung open. The Cathedral of the Holy Name in Chicago was packed with elegantly dressed guests, the air heavy with perfume and anticipation. Hundreds of pairs of eyes fixed on her. She clutched the bouquet of white roses, nearly crushing the delicate petals in her trembling grip. Her father's arm looped through hers, guiding her down the aisle. Robert Morgan looked composed in his tuxedo, yet she sensed his underlying fear. With each step, Helen felt waves of panic. "I am about to marry a man who thinks I'm someone else." The early morning had been a haze of final touches, makeup expertly applied, hair styled in the same flowing waves as Rachel's. Evelyn, near tears, repeatedly reminded Helen not to speak too softly, not to fidget. The wedding coordinator insisted on a precise schedule: the procession, the vows, the photographs. There was no room for second thoughts. As Helen's satin heels clacked against the polished marble floor, her eyes landed on Adrian Reynolds at the front of the church. Tall, with broad shoulders beneath a tailored black suit, he stood beside the officiant. His dark hair was clipped neatly at the sides, silver just touching his temples. His eyes, a vivid blue before the accident she'd read, did not track her movements. Instead, they gazed slightly upward with that distant, unfocused quality of someone who could no longer see. When they reached him, Helen could barely breathe. The organ music swelled before dying into reverent silence. The officiant smiled warmly and spoke, but the words slipped past Helen's ears. Time seemed to slow as Adrian turned his head toward the sound of her shallow breathing. "Rachel," he said softly, holding out his hand. Helen placed hers in his, reminding herself to maintain a confident posture. Her pulse hammered so loudly she was sure he'd hear it. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching. Anxiety spiked, but Adrian's expression was gentle, his voice low and rich as he repeated after the officiant. Could he sense her terror? In the hush of the cathedral, She forced herself to focus on the officiant's cues, reciting vows meant for another woman. The words tasted hollow on her tongue. To have and to hold, in sickness and in health. She felt light-headed, almost as if she were watching a scene from outside her own body. This isn't real, her mind screamed, and yet every second was etched in full view of family, friends, and the solemn hush of onlookers. At last, the officiant smiled. "You may kiss your bride." Adrian turned carefully toward the sound of Helen's breath again, his hand rising to find her cheek. Gently, he leaned forward. Their lips met in the briefest graze, a moment simultaneously tender and unbearable. Helen's cheeks burned, a surge of guilt swirling with a spark of something else. Respect for the sincerity in Adrian's gesture. Applause burst from the pews, jarring Helen back to reality. She clasped Adrian's arm as they faced the guests. Cameras flashed, capturing a union built on lies. Her mother beamed from the front row, blinking away tears. Her father exhaled in visible relief. Moments later, they were swept outside into a flurry of congratulations. Camera clicks and confetti. A sleek black limousine waited at the curb to take them to the reception. Helen managed a strained smile as Adrian helped her into the car, the irony bitter. He was offering support she felt undeserving of. Inside the limo, the door closed, sealing them in a cocoon of leather seats and tinted windows. Adrian turned toward her. Though his eyes didn't focus, he seemed to sense her tension. "Are you all right? You're quieter than usual. I know it's been a whirlwind." Helen forced a laugh, hoping it sounded like Rachel's casual ease. "I'm just tired. Weddings, you know." He nodded, concern evident in his tone. "I'm grateful you're here. I realize I'm not the easiest person to marry, especially given my situation." A pang of empathy ripped through Helen. She swallowed hard. This man, blind and likely lonely, had put his trust in Rachel. And here Helen was, masquerading as his bride. How could she respond? She settled for squeezing his hand, feeling the cool metal of the new ring circling his finger. "We'll figure things out," she said softly, the words more a plea than a promise. The limo pulled away, and Helen stared out at the Chicago skyline, blurring past. As the new Mrs. Reynolds, she felt as though she were falling deeper into a spiral of guilt and responsibility, and for the first time, she wondered if she'd ever find the courage to tell Adrian the truth. Helen had never seen such a grand property up close, let alone imagined living in one. As the black SUV pulled through the tall wrought-iron gates, she caught her first glimpse of Adrian Reynolds' mansion on Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Early evening light cast warm hues across the sprawling Victorian facade, its turreted rooflines and wraparound porches framed by ancient pines and meticulously trimmed hedges. The house seemed both regal and secluded, as though guarding its secrets behind the broad lake shimmering just beyond the manicured lawn. Charlotte Winters, Adrian's efficient assistant, met Helen at the foot of the sweeping front steps. With close-cropped grey hair and sharp eyes behind her glasses, Charlotte wore a calm professionalism that made Helen's stomach flutter with apprehension. Would Charlotte notice every slip of Helen's forced identity? "Welcome home, Mrs. Reynolds," Charlotte said, giving a polite nod. The words felt foreign, but Helen managed a slight smile. She tightened her grip on her small overnight bag, reminding herself she was here to help her family, if only until they found Rachel. Helen followed Charlotte through the grand foyer, where marble floors gleamed under soft chandelier light. She was acutely aware of Adrian by her side, guided by memory and habit. His steps were sure, though he trailed his hand lightly along the ornately carved banister. Small details spoke of the adjustments he'd made since losing his sight: discreet braille markings on doorknobs, extra handrails, and smart home technology throughout. Eleanor Simmons will show you around, Charlotte explained, pausing by a large oil painting of Adrian's ancestors. She's the house manager. If there's anything you need, please let her know. With that, Charlotte excused herself to attend to phone calls and schedules, leaving Helen feeling suddenly exposed in this palace that was supposed to be hers, except it wasn't. Adrian angled his head toward Helen. "I know it can be overwhelming," he said in his resonant voice. "When I bought this place years ago, I loved its grandeur. After the accident, I stayed because it's familiar and I appreciate the quiet by the lake. But I realize it's a lot." She forced a gentle laugh, remembering to speak in the slightly brighter tone that resembled Rachel's. "It's beautiful." Stepping aside, she tried to mask her discomfort. She'd grown up in privilege, but her parents' home in Lake Forest felt modest compared to this. Now, everything from the high ceilings to the thick Persian rugs exuded unspoken wealth. A sturdy woman with grey hair pulled into a tight bun appeared from a corridor. "Mrs. Reynolds, I'm Eleanor. We're so pleased to have you." Eleanor's wise brown eyes flicked over Helen with curiosity, but no outward suspicion. "Let me show you the library, then the dining room. Dinner will be served shortly." At the mention of a library, Helen perked up. Books had always been her sanctuary. She followed Eleanor into a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling shelves accessed by a rolling ladder. The sweet tang of aged paper and leather bindings welcomed her like an old friend. This was one of Mr. Reynolds's favorite spaces before... Eleanor trailed off, nodding respectfully to Adrian's condition. "He still keeps his collection, though we've added audiobooks and braille volumes. It was important to him that reading remained part of his life." Helen brushed her fingertips along the spines of first editions she could only dream of owning in her modest bookstore back in Chicago. Adrian remained near the entrance, hands lightly folded, as though listening for her reaction. She felt a sudden pang of guilt. She understood him more than he knew, shared his passion for the written word, yet she was here under the guise of someone else. After Eleanor concluded the tour, they all gathered for dinner in a formal dining room that sparkled with crystal and silver. The meal felt almost ceremonial. While servers moved gracefully around the table, Helen tried to recall the details she'd memorized about Rachel's likes and dislikes. Thankfully, Adrian didn't inquire further about her subdued mood, attributing it to the hectic wedding schedule. Midway through the meal, Adrian gently reached for Helen's hand. "I'm happy we can finally share this home," he said quietly. "I hope you'll grow to love it here. I want it to feel like our place." Helen forced a soft smile. "I'm sure I will," she replied, voice tight with uncertainty. The mansion might be breathtaking, but to her it still felt like a stage set for a charade. As the night deepened outside, she wondered how long she could keep lying to this man who seemed so ready to trust her. Helen awoke early the next morning, the pale dawn light filtering through heavy drapes in the lavish bedroom she now shared with Adrian. Though the space boasted a grand four-poster bed and a view of the lake, an uneasy feeling churned in her stomach. The events of the past week had hardly felt real. She dressed quietly and slipped into the hallway, eager for a moment alone. She found her way back to the library. Early sunlight spilled through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes drifting in the still air. A sense of calm washed over her as she ran her hand along the spines of 100 different authors. It almost felt like home, except for the persistent guilt coiled in her chest. A gentle voice broke the hush. Exploring. She whirled around to find Adrian standing at the threshold, dressed in casual slacks and a button-down shirt. He carried a folded cane in one hand, but mostly navigated by memory. Although his eyes didn't focus on her, his head angled just so, listening attentively. "I didn't realize you were up," Helen said, forcing a lighter tone. "You move so quietly." Adrian's lips curved into a soft smile. "I've had a lot of practice. When I first lost my sight, every step felt like a leap into the unknown. But you adapt." He paused, as though thinking, "It's funny. When I knew you before, you never seemed very interested in the library." Helen's stomach lurched. She needed to stay consistent with her sister's alleged preferences. "I guess I've changed," she said softly. "Or maybe I'm discovering new things about myself." Something like curiosity flickered across his features. "I'm glad. This collection once defined me. But recently, it's been gathering dust." Gingerly, he set down his folded cane, placing a hand on a nearby bookshelf. "Would you read something to me tonight? Something different? It might be nice to share that." A pang of genuine warmth spread through Helen's chest. Reading aloud was second nature to her, especially in her bookstore. "Yes, of course," she said, voice catching. She had to be careful not to show too much expertise. Rachel was never the avid reader. But it felt like a small connection she couldn't resist. Charlotte's voice cut in from behind them. "Adrian, your driver is ready. You have an appointment with Dr. Grant in Chicago this afternoon." Then her gaze flicked to Helen. "He's hoping you'll accompany him if your schedule permits." Helen hesitated. She glanced at Adrian, whose expression held mild anticipation. If Rachel was indeed meant to be part of this world, she'd accompany him without question. "Sure," she replied, smoothing a hand over her shirt. "Let me just change." By late morning, they were on the road, Daniel Parker at the wheel. Helen sat beside Adrian, wrestling with the swirl of new emotions. She'd read that Adrian's blindness followed a severe car crash. She wondered if the crash was truly accidental or had deeper shadows behind it. He rarely spoke about the details, but she sensed a quiet pain he carried. At the hospital's outpatient wing, Dr. Maxwell Grant greeted them with a warm handshake. In his early 60s, with a neat white beard, the ophthalmologist exuded a calm, reassuring presence. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said politely, though his gaze studied her face with slightly more interest than comfortable. "Glad you came." Helen willed her posture not to stiffen. Did he suspect anything? Possibly not. But he'd known Rachel at least by name for several months. She sidestepped his scrutiny, allowing him to guide Adrian into a private exam room. The door shut behind them, leaving Helen in the stark white corridor, alone with her racing thoughts. While waiting, she checked her phone to find multiple missed calls from her mother. She also noticed a text from the bookstore's part-time cashier, who needed a restock of popular titles. She felt a twinge of longing for her old life, a simpler routine. Now she was here, embedded in a secret that grew heavier by the day. When Adrian emerged, Dr. Grant was nodding in approval. "We'll talk further next time, Adrian. Keep considering that procedure. If you decide you're ready, we'll get it scheduled." A procedure. Helen's heart jumped. Could Adrian's vision be restored someday? If so, time was ticking. The thought sent a chill through her. If he regained his sight, he'd see that Helen was not the woman he believed he'd married. Late that evening, Helen stood in the foyer, listening to the echo of urgent voices drifting from the formal dining room. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to catch fragments of conversation. Marcus Reynolds, Adrian's older brother, had arrived unannounced, accompanied by his elegant, aloof wife, Vivian. Their presence crackled with tension. "I just think it's reckless," Marcus's voice boomed, though he tried to keep it low. "This rushed marriage, this talk of an experimental surgery. Adrian, you're gambling with your life and the family legacy." Helen's throat tightened. She knew Marcus had reservations about Adrian's decisions. From the glimpses she gathered, Marcus believed he should manage the family's businesses, especially after Adrian's accident. His skepticism about Rachel only added to his hostility. She peered around the corner and spotted Adrian standing at the head of the table, jaw set. His eyes, unfocused as they were, still exuded quiet resolve. "I appreciate your concern," he said, voice calm, "but I'm capable of making my own choices." "Marriage was certainly a choice," Vivian chimed in, her tone smooth as silk. "We're all just surprised it happened so fast." She cast a fleeting glance at Helen, lurking in the shadows. Helen felt exposed, even if Vivian hadn't spotted her. Gathering her courage, Helen stepped forward. She cleared her throat, trying to project Rachel's confident demeanor. "Hello, Marcus, Vivian." She nodded politely. "We'd have happily invited you to the ceremony, but everything happened so quickly." Marcus's eyes flicked over her with thinly veiled suspicion. "Yes, I heard. A whirlwind romance, especially after so many months of little contact." He let the observation hang in the air. Helen forced a gracious smile. "Things change. Adrian and I reconnected, and we realized we didn't want to wait." It felt like reciting a script. She prayed Adrian would confirm the story. He rested a hand lightly on Helen's shoulder, a gentle, supportive gesture. "It might seem sudden to you, Marcus, but I've never been more certain of anything." For a moment, Helen found herself moved by Adrian's sincere words, even though they weren't truly meant for her. The guilt gnawed at her heart all over again. They settled into an uneasy dinner. Marcus asked pointed questions about Rachel's recent activities, her influencer collaborations, her time in Chicago, and Helen did her best to respond vaguely. Vivian offered icy smiles and half-hearted compliments on the meal, clearly more interested in dissecting the new Mrs. Reynolds with every glance. When the tense dinner finally ended, Adrian guided Helen out to the back terrace. A crisp breeze blew in from Lake Geneva, rustling the manicured hedges. Lights from neighboring lake homes twinkled across the water. "Marcus can be difficult," Adrian said softly, leaning against the stone balustrade. "After my accident, he tried to take over. We've clashed over business decisions ever since." He paused, turning toward her. "I'm sorry you had to endure his interrogation." Helen mustered a half-smile. "It's all right. I expected some skepticism." He tilted his head, his expression pensive. "I wish this hadn't been so rushed. You deserve a proper celebration, not this swirl of doubt." Her chest tightened at the genuine concern in his voice. Why did he have to be so kind? She fought the urge to confess everything. "He doesn't even know who you really are." A voice in her head screamed, but she couldn't risk it. Not with her family's future hanging in the balance, and not without a clue where Rachel was hiding. They fell silent for a while, the hush punctuated by the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore. She thought about the procedure Dr. Grant mentioned. Adrian hadn't yet asked for her opinion. And if he went through with it, would she be exposed in an instant? Adrian let out a long breath. "Marcus believes I can't handle my responsibilities anymore. That's why he's hovering. But I won't let him dictate my life. I've made too many choices based on fear." Helen stared out over the moonlit lake, feeling her heart ache at his vulnerable words. She wanted to reassure him, tell him he was stronger than he knew, but how could she when her very presence was the biggest lie of all? Helen fussed with the hem of her sweater as she sat in the sunroom, warming her hands around a mug of tea. The morning light glinted off the glass walls, revealing a panoramic view of the lake. Autumn leaves danced in the breeze outside, a kaleidoscope of russet and gold. It was one of those crisp Wisconsin mornings that made her wish she could enjoy it, without the constant churn of guilt in her mind. Adrian entered, led by the subtle memory of the mansion's layout. and settled into a chair across from her. Despite losing his sight, he moved gracefully, a testament to the careful routines he'd developed. He wore a slight smile that faltered as soon as he sensed Helen's mood. "You're quiet today," he commented gently. "I hope it's not because of Marcus's visit last night." Helen took a slow sip of tea. "I'm just thinking," she replied. She couldn't admit the truth, that every day she sank deeper into deception. For a fleeting moment, she fantasized about confiding in him, trusting his kindness, but the threat to her family loomed too large. She forced a small smile. "I might just be tired. It's been hectic since the wedding." Adrian nodded in understanding. "I've been thinking, maybe we should have some normalcy, something just for us. How would you feel about cooking together tonight? Eleanor says the kitchen is fully stocked." Helen tried not to look surprised. She recalled that Rachel had barely boiled water, but Helen herself had always found a certain comfort in simple recipes, soups, pastas, dishes she'd cooked while living above her bookstore. "Sure," she said, lips curving in a tentative grin. "That sounds nice." That evening, they convened in the spacious chef's kitchen, countertops gleaming under warm pendant lights. Adrian ran his hand along the utensils arranged by Charlotte and the staff, carefully learning each location. He seemed relaxed, even excited to share this small domestic act. Helen guided him gently, just enough to help, but not so much that she overstepped his sense of independence. They chose to make a simple pasta dish with fresh tomatoes, garlic, and herbs. Adrian insisted on chopping the garlic himself, carefully feeling the cloves' edges beneath his fingertips. When he asked for her input, Helen realized she was revealing a side of herself that Rachel wouldn't normally show. Yet something about the moment felt right, almost natural. She found herself laughing as she described the difference between fresh basil and dried. Eleanor popped in briefly to observe, smiling at the scene, then left them to it. Once they settled at the small kitchen table, the steam rising from 2 bowls of homemade pasta, Adrian inhaled deeply. "Smells incredible," he said. "I can't remember the last time we cooked like this together." Helen stiffened, another statement that hinted at the actual Rachel's absence from such moments. She improvised, "Well, maybe we should do it more often." Her heart pounded, hoping he wouldn't catch the forced casualness in her voice. He forked up a bite and nodded in appreciation. "You amaze me sometimes," he said. "There are moments I feel like I'm really seeing new sides of you. Your voice, your manner. There's a warmth I didn't notice before." Setting down his fork, he reached for her hand across the table. "I'm grateful for it." A flutter rippled through her chest, warmth mixed with dread. How long could she maintain this facade while forging deeper emotional ties to him? She squeezed his hand gently, unable to muster more than a faint smile. After dinner, they carried their dishes to the sink. As the hot water ran, rinsing away the evidence of their modest culinary triumph, Adrian spoke in a low voice. "I was serious about wanting you to read to me tonight. Would you mind?" Helen swallowed, remembering the stack of classics she'd glimpsed in the library. "Of course," she replied, trying not to show too much enthusiasm. "Any particular genre in mind?" He tilted his head. "Surprise me?" A pang of guilt thudded in her chest once again. If only I could be myself, she thought. He might actually enjoy my real interests. But she merely nodded, feeling the tug of a fragile bond forming, one that left her more conflicted than ever. Helen closed the thick, leather-bound volume of poetry she'd been reading aloud, her voice echoing softly off the high library walls. Adrian leaned back in his armchair, eyes closed, a faint smile gracing his lips. A single brass floor lamp cast a warm glow across the rug, illuminating a scene that felt both intimate and precarious. "That was lovely," Adrian murmured. "I'd almost forgotten how much I enjoyed poetry. Thank you for indulging me. Helen set the book aside, nerves fluttering in her stomach. She'd risked selecting a compilation of romantic American poems, works she personally adored, but Rachel would likely have dismissed. Each line read had tugged at something buried inside her, reminding her of the person she'd once been before this masquerade. She stood, intending to return the book to its shelf, but paused at the corner of the library. There, half hidden by a wooden side table, she spotted a stack of letters tied with a ribbon. Curious, she knelt and gently slid them out. The top envelope was addressed to Mr. Adrian Reynolds in looping handwriting she didn't recognize. The postmark dated back several months. As if reading her change in posture, Adrian asked, "Is everything okay?" Helen quickly set the letters back. "Yes, just found some mail," she replied, forcing calm into her tone. He nodded, unaware of her sudden tension. "I sometimes misplace things. People assume I can't read letters, but I have them transcribed or scanned." His smile turned wistful. "Though I suppose Rachel never found them worth mentioning." Helen inhaled softly, guilt pressing in. She changed the subject. "I was thinking about the wedding earlier," she ventured, needing to test the waters. How did it feel to take that leap so fast?" His expression grew thoughtful. "I'd always been a private person, more so after the accident. Marrying was less about a grand ceremony, more about a promise. For a time, I worried you only agreed for appearances or convenience. But I've sensed a genuineness in you lately, something that makes me trust we have a chance at real closeness." Her heart twisted. Of all the lies swirling around them, the sincerity of her growing bond with him felt painfully real. She swallowed. "I just hope you never regret it," she whispered, eyes downcast. Adrian reached out a tentative hand, and she grasped it, letting him gently trace her fingers. "Regrets are a waste," he said quietly. "I'd rather move forward than dwell on what-ifs. I learned that lesson when the doctors told me I might never see again. I won't spend my life wishing for what can't be changed." Helen's throat constricted, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She almost told him everything. Right then, the words balanced on the tip of her tongue. But fear seized her, fear of his reaction, of her family's ruin, of the heartbreak sure to follow. The phone on the end table rang, fracturing the moment. Helen rose to answer it, relieved and disappointed at once. "Hello?" A familiar voice crackled on the line. Her mother, Evelyn. "Helen, we still have no sign of Rachel. I'm trying to keep the creditors at bay, but your father's debts, they're getting worse." Helen's grip tightened on the receiver. "Mom, can't we talk about this later?" she hissed, glancing at Adrian, who sat placidly across the room. "I'm in the library with him now." Evelyn's voice turned urgent. "When are you going to discuss Adrian's finances? We need that transfer to clear soon. We can't stall forever." Helen's stomach lurched. She hung up swiftly, her heart pounding. It felt as though every day she existed in two worlds, one in which she was forging a tentative, unexpected bond with Adrian, and another where she had to maintain this elaborate fraud to save her parents from financial disaster. Returning to him, she tried to calm the tremor in her voice. "I'm sorry. That was our mother." She nearly tripped over the words. "She can be overbearing." Adrian offered a sympathetic nod, sensing her tension. "Sounds like a family issue. If there's something troubling you, I hope you'll share it when you're ready." Helen forced a shaky smile, the weight of her secret growing heavier by the second. "I will," she promised, a half-truth that echoed in the quiet library. But when, she wondered, and how much damage would be done by then? Helen's hands shook as she held the newly arrived envelope, the one addressed to Adrian in a script she recognized instantly, Rachel Morgan. It had been courier-delivered that morning, an unexpected jolt She stood in the marble foyer, sunlight illuminating the swirling emblem of the courier service on the packaging. Her breath caught. Was this it? Was Rachel finally contacting Adrian directly? She glanced around. No staff lingered nearby. Adrian was outside, discussing repairs on the garden path with Daniel. The house felt eerily quiet. Pulse racing, she tore the envelope open and scanned the contents. "Dear Adrian," it began, "I'm sorry I left without warning. I can't go through with this marriage. I hope one day you'll understand." Helen's vision blurred momentarily. Rachel's letter might as well be a ticking time bomb. At least, it didn't explicitly mention the switch. It seemed more like a parting note, albeit weeks too late. Still, the faint clue that Rachel Morgan was the writer would raise dangerous questions. If Adrian ever read it, he'd know something was gravely off. Before she could plan her next move, footsteps echoed across the foyer's tiles. Charlotte Winters appeared, wearing her usual composed expression. Helen quickly shoved the letter behind her back, heart pounding. "Mrs. Reynolds, I was looking for you," Charlotte said. Her sharp eyes flicked to Helen's tense posture. "Are you all right?" Helen forced a smile, though her stomach twisted. "Just sorting through some mail." Her voice cracked slightly. She hoped Charlotte hadn't noticed the letter's distinctive script. Seemingly dismissing the subject, Charlotte extended a folder. "Adrian asked me to have you review these documents regarding the Foundation's new project proposals. He values your opinion." Then she paused, her gaze lingering. "He's in the study when you're ready." Helen nodded and clutched the folder. "Thank you, Charlotte." As soon as Charlotte walked away, Helen darted to the nearest side corridor, scanning for a place to hide Rachel's letter. Panic spiked in her chest. She had to keep it from Adrian for now. Without a second thought, she hurried to a nearby fireplace in an unused sitting room. She lit a match with shaking hands, setting the letter aflame. The edges curled as the fire consumed Rachel's words, turning them to ash. Helen watched with a swirl of guilt and relief. "I have to keep the secret intact until I figure out what to do." She rushed to find Adrian in his study, the letter's final embers still searing her conscience. He sat behind a mahogany desk, brows knitted as he listened to a financial report on speakerphone. The space smelled faintly of leather and old books, the walls lined with thick tomes. He ended the call with a polite but firm tone. "Ah, there you are," he said, turning toward her. "I was hoping you'd come. Charlotte mentioned she gave you the proposals. The Foundation is planning to expand accessible reading programs for visually impaired students." A touch of excitement lit his voice. "I'd love your input." Helen's grip on the folder tightened. She forced herself to walk closer, setting it on the desk. Inside, she found outlines for literacy initiatives, budgets, potential partnerships. The sincerity of it all squeezed her heart. Here was Adrian, forging a path to help people like him adapt to life without sight. While she maintained a facade, she sank into the chair opposite him. "It looks impressive. You want to fund research too?" He nodded. "Part of me hopes they'll advance treatments, maybe even help Dr. Grant's ongoing trials." He brushed his fingertips over the desk's edge, expression solemn. "I've given serious thought to that surgery. If it succeeds, I might regain partial vision. I could see shapes, colors, maybe your face." A delicate pause. "Would that scare you?" Helen's breath caught. Yes, it petrified her. If he could see, the hoax would crumble. But she couldn't show her terror. She gently reached for his hand, feeling calluses from where he'd once gripped the steering wheel that fateful night. "It doesn't scare me," she lied, voice trembling. "I just want whatever is best for you." His face softened at what he must have interpreted as support. "Thank you. It means more than you know." Helen fought back tears. Moments ago, She'd burned evidence that revealed the truth he deserved. She squeezed his hand, whispering, "I hope you'll always believe in us," even as she wondered if she could ever gather the courage to come clean. In that silent study, with the letter's ashes still fresh, Helen faced the growing dread that time was running out on her carefully constructed illusion. The clicking of heels on polished marble echoed through the lobby of the Chicago Hilton, where a grand banner read, "Reynolds Foundation Gala, Vision for the Future." Helen stood beside Adrian, her heart thrumming at the spectacle around them. Guests dressed in glittering gowns and tuxedos laughed and mingled, while staff in crisp uniforms guided them toward the enormous ballroom. Gold and white decorations, crystal chandeliers, and towering floral arrangements lent the night a dreamlike quality. Helen adjusted the delicate silver mask perched on her face. Her mother, Evelyn, had insisted that she and Adrian arrive in style, fitting the night's theme of a masquerade. The irony was not lost on Helen. She was living a lie, and now literally wearing a mask, surrounded by people who believed she was Rachel. Beside her, Adrian wore a sleek black suit and a more subtle eye mask that rested lightly atop his cheekbones. Though he couldn't see the swirling colors of the crowd, his expression was alert. The hush in his body language betrayed nerves he tried to hide. "I've never been fond of large crowds," he murmured, leaning closer to Helen so she could hear him above the classical music wafting through the air. "But the foundation needs this fundraising boost. If we can expand our literacy programs and support Dr. Grant's work, it'll be worth the discomfort." Helen slipped her hand through his arm, her voice warm. "You're doing a wonderful thing tonight. People will see your commitment." The pang of guilt bit harder, knowing how much he believed in her support, even though she stood on borrowed ground. They stepped into the ballroom, a swirl of color and music enveloping them. Crystal chandeliers bathed the dance floor in soft light, while waiters threaded between guests, offering champagne and canapes. A small stage at the far end held a string quartet playing an upbeat waltz. The night felt magical, yet Helen's stomach twisted with the reminder that everything she was living could collapse at any moment. Soon, Charlotte approached them, tablet in hand. "Adrian, they're ready for you to make an opening statement whenever you feel comfortable," she announced, her eyes darting briefly to Helen. Charlotte remained courteous but reserved, as if she still couldn't fully reconcile the Rachel she saw now with the Rachel she once knew. Adrian nodded. "Let's get it over with." He felt for the microphone stand near the stage, and Helen guided him gently, her hand at his elbow. The crowd quieted as they noticed him step forward. "Good evening," he began, voice resonating through the speakers. "I'm Adrian Reynolds, and I want to thank each and every one of you for supporting this cause so close to my heart. 3 years ago, I lost my sight. Since then, I've understood the challenges of navigating a world not always designed for people with visual impairments. Tonight's gala is about bridging that gap, about opening the door to literacy, education, and independence for those who can't read traditional books." Applause rippled through the crowd, and Helen felt tears prick at her eyes. Adrian's courage and sincerity moved her, even as her chest constricted with the knowledge that she stood beside him under false pretenses. He concluded with a nod of thanks, and the quartet resumed its gentle music. Helen guided Adrian off stage, where they were immediately congratulated by donors and socialites eager to shake his hand. Marcus and Vivian Reynolds joined them briefly. Marcus offered a stiff nod of approval, while Vivian wore a practiced social smile. Despite the surface pleasantries, Helen sensed the tensions simmering beneath. Throughout the evening, Helen wove through the crowd at Adrian's side, exchanging polite greetings and expressing gratitude on behalf of the foundation. A swirl of expensive perfume and chatter filled the ballroom. Here and there, she spotted familiar faces from society pages, politicians, celebrities, influential philanthropists. At every introduction, Helen forced herself to stay in character, reminding herself how Rachel would act. At one point, Olivia Blackwell, a striking woman from Adrian's past, approached, eyes glinting with curiosity. "Rachel," she greeted, letting the name linger as if testing its authenticity. "We must catch up soon. I have so many questions about your sudden disappearance from the public eye." Helen's stomach clenched, but she offered a bright smile. "I'd be delighted," she replied lightly, hoping Olivia wouldn't pursue it further. Adrian sensed the tension and drew Helen away, politely ending the exchange. Later, as the night wore on, Helen stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city lights. Leaning against the railing, she inhaled the crisp air, trying to steady her nerves. The mask felt stifling, both literally and figuratively. Adrian, who had excused himself to speak privately with a donor, wasn't at her side. For a moment, she was alone with her guilt and the knowledge that time was running out on her elaborate lie. The next morning, Helen paced the ornate bedroom she shared with Adrian in the Lake Geneva mansion. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, glinting off the carved headboard and painting stripes across the plush cream carpet. Her pulse thrummed with the after-effects of last night's gala. The burden of the secret grew with every event, every speech, every moment she spent close to Adrian. She sank onto an upholstered bench, phone in hand. Her mother's number flashed on the screen. Again. With a shaky breath, she pressed answer. "Helen," Evelyn began in a clipped tone, "I've been trying to reach you. Any word on Rachel yet?" "No," Helen replied, feeling a hollow ache in her chest. "Mom, I'm doing everything I can to keep this ruse going, but I don't know how much longer," her mother cut in. "The wedding was only the start. We need that financial stability. Remember the debts. Have you spoken to Adrian about, well, helping us?" Helen clenched her jaw. "Mom, he's not an ATM. You can't expect me to just—" Evelyn's voice sharpened. "Helen, you have to. We're at the brink of bankruptcy. If we default on those loans, your father could face lawsuits, or worse. I don't think you understand how deep we're in." Tears pricked at Helen's eyes. "I do understand, but scamming him isn't the solution. If he finds out the truth, it'd be over for everyone." A sigh crackled through the line. "Look, you're already in the middle of this. If you care about saving us, about saving the store you love, then do what must be done. Convince him to provide the funds. We'll sort the rest once your sister returns." Evelyn hung up, leaving Helen's hand trembling around the phone. She wiped her eyes, forcing herself to steady. Adrian deserved honesty. He was a good man, a better man than her family gave him credit for. But fear of losing the bookstore, of watching her parents crumble under debt, paralyzed her. The question was, how long could she bear this weight? A knock at the door startled her. Adrian stood there, wearing a hesitant smile. "Everything all right? You've been quieter than usual." He slipped inside, resting a hand on the canopy post of the bed. The morning sunlight highlighted the fine lines near his eyes, lines that told stories of past struggles and a resolute spirit. Helen cleared her throat. "Just, family things." She tried not to appear too shaken. "Nothing to worry about." He tilted his head, concern etched into his features. "I can tell something's bothering you. If you ever want to share, I'm here." Guilt stormed through her anew. She longed to blurt out the entire deception, to beg for forgiveness. But that would shatter everything. Unable to hold his gaze, she changed the subject. "How are you feeling after the gala? It was quite a night." He exhaled a soft laugh. "Exhausted, honestly. I appreciate the support, but big crowds and constant chatter can be overwhelming for me now. Still, seeing so many people invest in the foundation, it's worth it." Helen's chest squeezed. You did wonderfully. You're making a real difference." He gave a small shrug, stepping closer until she could see the flecks of grey at his temples. "I want to do more. Dr. Grant says the schedule for my potential surgery is wide open. I need to decide soon. The thought of seeing your face, it keeps me up at night, in a good way." Her heart hammered at the idea. With partial vision, he'd inevitably discover she wasn't who she claimed to be. She fought to keep her voice calm. There's time to think it through, right? It's a big decision." Adrian nodded. "Yes, but Dr. Grant says each month that passes can affect the likelihood of success. Nerve regeneration becomes less certain." Helen forced a tight smile, mind racing. "Whatever you decide, I'll be here." The words felt like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. He reached out, gently tilting her chin so their eyes met. Though his gaze remained unfocused, the intensity of his closeness was undeniable. "I'm relieved to hear you say that," he murmured, fingers brushing softly along her scar, which the makeup no longer fully concealed. A tear threatened to slip from her eye. She swallowed hard. If only he could see how deeply she yearned to stop living a lie, and how terrified she was of the day he finally did. Helen was halfway down the grand staircase when the front doors of the mansion burst open. Her father's frantic voice echoed through the foyer. "Helen, where are you?" Stepping onto the last marble step, she saw Robert Morgan, his coat askew and face flushed. His hair, once meticulously styled, now hung in disarray, and the bags beneath his eyes looked darker than ever. Behind him stood a figure Helen never thought she'd see so soon. Rachel. Helen's throat went dry. Her twin sister looked disheveled, though still undeniably beautiful. She wore an oversized sweater and jeans, dark circles under her matching green eyes betraying sleepless nights. She clutched a small suitcase, nails chipped and face strained. It was a stark contrast to her glamorous, perfectly curated social media persona. Helen approached slowly. "Rachel, I can't believe you're here." Rachel's lips pressed into a tight line. "Believe it," she replied, her tone clipped but shaky. Her gaze darted past Helen, scanning the mansion's high ceilings, the ornate decor. Then her eyes landed on the ring glinting on Helen's left hand, and her expression hardened. "So it's true," she whispered. "They really made you marry him in my place." Robert cleared his throat. "We didn't make her do anything. She stepped in to protect the family." Helen bristled, knowing her father's statement was only half true. "Why are you back?" she asked, voice trembling. "You vanished without explanation." Rachel exhaled sharply. "I had my reasons. I was never in love with Adrian. I barely knew him. I couldn't just tie my life to someone She shook her head. "But now, I have no choice. I need money, and apparently Dad does too. So if we're going to fix this, we need to figure something out. Adrian can't keep living with a fake wife. That's insane." Helen's heart pounded. She dreaded Rachel's return, yet part of her was relieved not to carry the burden alone. But if Rachel planned to reclaim her fiancé, how would that even work? Adrian believed he was already married. "You can't just waltz back in and announce you're the real Rachel," Helen whispered, horrified. At that moment, Adrian's voice resonated from the top of the staircase, making them all freeze. "Is something going on down there?" He carefully descended, guided by the railing, confusion drawing lines on his brow. "Robert, I didn't realize you were visiting." Then he paused, as though sensing another presence. "Who else is here?" Panic shot through Helen. She rushed up a few steps to intercept Adrian, placing her hands gently on his forearms. "We have a visitor," she managed, her voice unsteady. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Rachel step backward, pressing herself against the wall. Robert looked equally panicked, not wanting to expose the truth outright. Rachel's expression flickered with indecision, and for once, she seemed genuinely shaken. Helen motioned for her father to get Rachel out of sight. Robert hurriedly ushered her into the study, closing the door behind them. Helen forced a bright smile, leading Adrian the rest of the way down. "Dad just arrived," she said, carefully choosing her words. "We're discussing some urgent family matters." Adrian's face softened with concern. "Is everything all right? Did your father come to ask about money again?" The question seared Helen with guilt. "It's complicated," she mumbled, guiding him toward the sitting room. "We'll handle it. Maybe you should go rest while we sort this out." He hesitated, sensing her anxiety. "Helen, I can tell something's wrong. Talk to me." Helen's eyes welled. She wanted to spill everything, that her sister had returned, that the entire marriage was a sham, but the house staff might overhear, and Rachel was just steps away. She forced composure. "Let us figure out the details first. I promise I'll fill you in as soon as we know more." Adrian nodded slowly, though uncertainty shadowed his features. "All right," he murmured, letting her guide him to a quiet area of the house where he could wait. "But don't keep me in the dark too long." Helen watched him go, feeling torn in two. Rachel was back, demanding her place. Adrian was on the brink of discovering everything, and her father's desperation was at an all-time high. Leaning against the wall, she forced a breath. The deception that once felt merely terrifying now felt lethal, poised to destroy everything in its path. An hour later, Helen shut the study door, leaving Adrian in the sitting room and bracing herself for the confrontation with Rachel. The tall windows of the study overlooked the lake, serene in the afternoon light, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside. Robert hovered by the fireplace, anxiously rubbing his temples, while Rachel stood with arms crossed, her suitcase on the floor. The tension bristled in the air. Helen broke the silence. "Why now? Where have you been?" Her voice trembled with anger and relief. She couldn't forget the frantic call from Rachel before the wedding and her subsequent disappearance. Rachel let out a bitter laugh. "I was with Peter," she admitted. We ran off. It got complicated. Turns out he's not exactly reliable, and now I'm broke, pregnant, and exhausted." Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed a hand to her abdomen. Helen's eyes widened. Pregnant. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. Shock, empathy, and a sliver of anger. "Rachel, why didn't you say anything?" She shrugged miserably. "Because I was scared. Peter isn't ready for a child, and I was never ready for this marriage. But I couldn't face the consequences, so I took off, hoping the problem would solve itself." Robert cleared his throat, tension etched in every line of his weary face. "And now you're back, needing money to raise a baby. Money that Adrian could have provided if you'd gone through with the wedding in the first place." He flung a frustrated hand. "We're at the brink of financial collapse, Rachel. Do you even realize what you've done to us?" Rachel's lips quivered. "Don't lecture me, Dad. You and Mom have your own secrets, your own debts. You were willing to sell me off to keep your precious lifestyle." Helen's heart pounded as the argument escalated. She stepped forward, trying to keep her voice steady. "We can't stand here pointing fingers all day. We need a plan." Rachel looked up, eyes burning. "And what's your plan, Helen?" "To keep pretending to be me forever." She gestured at the ring on Helen's finger, voice trembling with bitterness. "You married him, didn't you? You must know that's insane." Helen swallowed hard, guilt wrapping around her like a vice. "I only did it to buy some time for our parents. We thought you'd be back in a couple of days, not gone for weeks." She hesitated, searching Rachel's eyes. "Adrian's a good man, Rachel. He doesn't deserve this. A flash of regret passed over Rachel's face, but her resolve hardened. I need money. Adrian's my best shot. But now that you're legally married to him, that complicates everything. Robert stepped in, desperation thick in his voice. He's not your best shot. He's a person. And if we reveal everything right now, what do you think he'll do? He might cut us off entirely. We'll be ruined. Rachel's gaze flicked to the window, tears threatening. So what's the alternative? Continue lying to him while I slip away with no resources? I'm pregnant, Dad. I have to figure out how to support myself. Helen pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. The stifling tension pressed on all sides. We have to tell him. Sooner or later, he'll find out. There's no easy fix here. Robert exhaled heavily, shoulders slumped. Let me think. Maybe we can secure some funds first, ensure the debts are covered, then we can figure out the rest. Indignation burned in Helen's chest. That's enough! We can't keep using Adrian. He's not a checkbook. This has gone too far. Rachel wiped at her eyes, voice cracking. I never asked for any of this. I just know I can't bring a baby into homelessness. Helen's heart twisted at her sister's vulnerability. Silence thickened. Finally, Robert spoke. We're out of time. The lenders are threatening legal action. If Adrian doesn't make a major transfer soon, your mother and I could lose the house and the bookstore might close. His gaze dropped. Helen, please, convince Adrian to invest or loan us the money under some pretense. Once we're safe, we'll figure out how to come clean. Helen wavered, nauseated by the moral quagmire. She turned to Rachel, voice soft. We'll get you help, but no more lies after this. One way or another, we have to tell Adrian the truth. Rachel looked away, hugging her arms around herself. The possibilities felt grim. Helen's heart pounded with dread, knowing the day of reckoning was near. If Adrian discovered the hoax on his own, the betrayal might be irreparable. And yet, how could she continue to betray a man who showed her nothing but trust? Night fell over Lake Geneva like a velvet curtain, wrapping the mansion in deep shadows. A storm threatened in the distance, lightning flickering along the horizon. Helen sat alone in a small upstairs lounge, a single lamp illuminating her pale face. The day's events had left her drained. Rachel was here, pregnant. Her father was pressing her to secure Adrian's financial help, and Adrian himself sensed something was amiss, but remained painfully in the dark. She picked up her phone and noticed new messages from the bookstore's cashier in Chicago, complaining about low stock and overdue utility bills. She realized with a jolt that the store, the one part of her life that felt truly her own, was also at risk. Her livelihood, her refuge, could vanish if her family sank deeper into debt. Footsteps sounded at the doorway. Adrian emerged from the dark corridor, guided by memory alone, wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants. I couldn't sleep, he admitted, voice low. I sensed you were awake too. May I come in? Helen nodded, then remembered he couldn't see it. Yes, please. She patted the cushion beside her. The soft murmur of thunder rolled in the distance. He settled carefully, the warmth of his shoulder brushing hers. Today was strange. Your father leaving so abruptly, you avoiding my questions. It feels like I'm missing a puzzle piece. Her stomach churned. She couldn't stand lying to him anymore. Adrian, she began softly, turning to face him, there's something I need to tell you, something important. His brow furrowed, his hand instinctively reaching for hers. Is it about your family's finances? You said once there were issues. I'm not blind to that. Bittersweet irony twisted inside her. He was indeed not blind to all things, only to her identity. She inhaled shakily. It's bigger than that. Before she could continue, a phone buzzed from the hall. Adrian sighed. I should ignore it, but Charlotte said she'd call if anything urgent came up with the foundation. Reluctantly, he stood and followed the faint light in the hallway to retrieve his phone. Helen clenched her fists. The moment to confess was slipping away. Again. She stared out the window at the storm building over the lake, thinking about how it mirrored her internal turmoil. She could almost see her reflection in the glass, the stolen ring glinting on her finger, mocking her with every flash of lightning. When Adrian returned, he wore a troubled expression. There's an important meeting tomorrow morning in Chicago about the Foundation's new initiative. Charlotte wants me there first thing. I'm sorry. Helen mustered a nod. It's all right. He paused, sensing her distress. Come with me, he said gently. Whatever you're dealing with, I'd rather face it together. Emotions roiled in Helen's chest. She thought about her father's pleas, Rachel's dire circumstances, and her own conscience. The lie could no longer stand. Adrian, I need... The words tangled in her throat. I need to tell you who I really am. He lifted her hand to his lips, placing a soft kiss on her knuckles. Tomorrow, he murmured, sounding suddenly weary. Let's head into Chicago and deal with the foundation business, then come back and talk. I promise I'll give you my full attention. A clap of thunder rattled the window panes, making her jump. She managed a weak smile, though tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. The thought of tomorrow brought equal parts dread and relief. If she didn't tell him soon, Rachel might corner him herself. Either way, the truth was hurtling toward them all like an inevitable storm. Adrian drew her into a gentle embrace, pressing his cheek against her hair. I'm here for you, he whispered. I've never been more certain. Her heart ached at the tenderness in his voice. She closed her eyes, letting a single tear slip free. I'm here too, she whispered back, as if she could will her words into honesty. If only he knew how fleeting this comfort might be. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the entire room for a split second. In that flash, Helen glimpsed her own reflection in the window, eyes brimming with tears, rings shining, carrying secrets poised to shatter the fragile bonds she'd come to cherish. Tomorrow, it would all unravel, and she feared, more than anything, that Adrian's gentle acceptance would be lost forever. Morning light filtered through the windows of Adrian's Chicago penthouse suite, the urban skyline stretching beyond the glass. Helen stood by the living room window, her stomach in knots. She could hear Adrian in the next room, finishing a call with Charlotte about the Foundation's meeting scheduled in an hour. Last night, she'd nearly confessed everything, only to be interrupted by a phone call. Now, the weight of her secret felt unbearable. Helen curled her fingers around the windowsill, her reflection stark against the city backdrop. Today had to be the day. She could no longer live in this agonizing half-light. She recalled the stormy night at Lake Geneva, how she'd promised to reveal the truth. Maybe once the meeting was over, they could talk privately here in Chicago, away from the mansion and her family's intrusion. A door clicked, and Adrian stepped out. He wore a crisp navy suit, his hair combed neatly, yet tension pressed around his eyes. "Ready?" he asked, voice gentle. She swallowed. "Yes," she managed. "We'll go to the Foundation meeting, then we need to have a serious conversation. I have something to tell you." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "You sound nervous." She couldn't deny it. "I am," she whispered, "but it can't wait any longer." He nodded, a faint line creasing his brow. Taking her hand, he guided her to the private elevator, the hush of the luxurious corridor amplifying her racing pulse. She forced her thoughts away from the looming confession and instead tried to focus on the meeting. Maybe discussing philanthropic initiatives would give her a final surge of courage. Downstairs, Daniel stood by the building's entrance. ready to drive them. Helen noticed how Adrian squared his shoulders as though bracing for battle. The drive passed in tense silence. She wanted to speak but couldn't find the words to lighten the moment, especially knowing the storm of truth about to break. They arrived at a sleek high-rise where the foundation rented an entire floor. Inside, modern decor and large windows created an atmosphere of innovation and purpose. Staff members greeted Adrian with deference, and he responded with polite warmth. Helen followed, heart pounding. The conference room bustled with board members, researchers, and potential donors. Charts detailing expansions to the reading programs lined the walls. Helen did her best to concentrate on the presentations, but adrenaline thrummed in her veins. She glanced at Adrian. He was composed, asking precise questions. An hour later, the meeting concluded with enthusiastic applause. As people funneled out, Helen stepped closer to Adrian, hearing him let out a breath of relief. "Good work," she murmured, brushing her hand against his arm. He nodded. "I think we secured enough commitments to launch our next round of programs. I'm relieved." He lowered his voice. "Now, about this conversation you wanted. Let's head back to the penthouse." Her pulse kicked up. "Yes, let's go." Back in the car, the tension in the air was nearly suffocating. Daniel tactfully remained quiet up front. Adrian's expression grew serious as he leaned toward Helen. "Is something wrong with your family?" he asked in a hushed tone. "I know you've been worried about them." Helen inhaled slowly, summoning courage. "It's more than that." She cast a glance at Daniel, who kept his gaze on the road, then added softly, "I'll explain once we're inside." They rode the elevator back to the penthouse in silence. The moment the doors slid shut behind them, Helen's composure cracked, heart hammering. She gestured Adrian to the sofa. He sank down, confusion deepening the lines of his face. She knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. "Adrian, what I'm about to say will change everything. Please believe I never wanted to hurt you." His grip tensed. "Helen, you're scaring me." Tears welled in her eyes. "My name is Helen Morgan," she said, voice trembling. "I'm Rachel's twin sister. The woman you thought you were marrying wasn't me. I stepped in when she ran away. I pretended to be Rachel." Adrian's head jerked back as though struck. For a moment, shock paralyzed him. Then he yanked his hands free. "What are you talking about?" he rasped, voice raw. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I only did it because my family was in debt, and they were terrified you'd call off the wedding. I never meant for it to go this far." Adrian's face contorted with betrayal. "So," he managed, voice cracking, "you're not my wife at all." Helen's heart shattered at the agony in his words. She scrambled to hold onto his hand, but he pulled away as though her touch burned. His unseeing eyes brimmed with anguish, searching for answers in a darkness deeper than blindness. The silence weighed heavier than any storm. Helen hovered by the floor-to-ceiling windows in Adrian's penthouse, her eyes puffy from crying. The city sprawled below, lights flickering as dusk crept in. It had been hours since her confession, and every minute felt like a lifetime. Adrian hadn't spoken more than a few curt sentences. The hush between them was thick with heartbreak. He stood in the kitchen now, phone pressed to his ear in a clipped conversation with Charlotte. Helen caught phrases like, "postpone the surgery," and "need time." Her stomach twisted. He'd been excited about the operation that might restore his vision partially. Now, because of her betrayal, he was pushing it away. When he ended the call, Adrian emerged from the kitchen with the air of a man haunted. His eyes, still unfocused, seemed to pierce her with hurt. "I told Dr. Grant I'm not ready for the procedure." Helen's voice cracked. "Because of me." He let out a harsh laugh devoid of humor. "Is there anything in my life that's not tainted by this lie?" He moved carefully toward a chair, but she saw him miscalculate the distance. He bumped his hip painfully on a side table, cursing under his breath. Reflexively, she rushed forward to help, but he jerked away. "Don't!" he snapped. Then, in a quieter tone, "I've spent months trusting you. I let you guide me, share my home, my bed." His voice faltered, and it was all a sham. Tears stung Helen's eyes. "I know I betrayed you. I never wanted to. I was coerced. My parents—" He raised a hand. "I don't want to hear excuses. You had opportunities to tell me the truth before now, but you didn't." She swallowed back sobs. He was right. She'd chosen to keep lying. The guilt she'd harbored for so long now burst open like a wound, raw and uncontainable. "I care about you," she whispered. "The feelings I developed, they're real." Adrian scoffed, turning his face away. "I can't trust anything you say. All those nights you read to me, cooked with me, were they just an act?" Helen choked back a sob. "No, they were me. I was myself in those moments, not Rachel. I never pretended to like books or share your interests. That was real." He shook his head in disbelief. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the hum of the penthouse's heating system. Finally, Adrian straightened his shoulders. "You need to leave." Her breath caught. "What? I can't look at you, listen to you right now. I don't even know who you are." He turned toward the door, arms folded tight. "Get out, Helen." She had no argument left, no words to fix this. Staggered by the pain she'd inflicted, she retrieved her purse and phone with trembling hands. She paused at the threshold, mind spinning. "I'm sorry," she said softly, voice cracking. "I never wanted to hurt you." He remained still as stone, back to her, eyes cast downward into nothingness. The elevator doors closed behind her with a metallic hiss, severing the bond she dared to cherish. Outside, the Chicago night wind stung her tear-streaked cheeks. She stumbled to a bench near the building's entrance, fished out her phone, and dialed her father's number. He answered in a panic, demanding to know if she'd convinced Adrian to release any funds. Helen's stomach churned. "He knows everything," she answered, voice flat. "He threw me out," her father cursed. "Helen, this is a disaster. If we don't secure that money—" She ended the call, unable to bear her family's desperation any longer. She was alone in a city she once loved, with nowhere to go and no illusions left. Taxis whizzed by, headlights glaring. Helen felt numb, as if her body couldn't contain the sorrow. Adrian's anguished face replayed in her mind. She sensed a profound certainty that she might never gain his forgiveness. After several long minutes, she stood unsteadily, catching a cab back to Lake Forest. The entire ride, she stared at the city lights receding. She thought about the bookstore, about the life she once led, a life overshadowed by the fiasco of the last few months. All of it lay in ruins now, as broken as the trust Adrian once placed in her. 2 weeks passed in a blur for Helen, though each day felt like an eternity. Back in Lake Forest, she stayed in her small childhood bedroom. The Morgan mansion felt eerily quiet, tension thrumming beneath every interaction. Her mother avoided eye contact, furious that the plan had unraveled. Her father disappeared for hours at a time, presumably meeting creditors or scrambling for a last-minute reprieve. Helen retreated to the bookstore, pages and memories, trying to salvage the only anchor she had left. She reorganized shelves and set up a small display of newly arrived titles, but her heart wasn't in it. Worried staff members noticed her hollow eyes and forced smiles. They knew better than to ask. One crisp afternoon, as she counted the till, the bell above the door jangled. Helen looked up, anxiety jumping to her throat ever since her confession. She feared seeing Adrian or one of his representatives appear. Instead, she found Charlotte Winters stepping inside. Charlotte wore a tailored grey coat over a simple blouse and trousers, her sharp gaze sweeping the bookstore. "Mrs." She paused, correcting herself. "Helen, I'd like a word, if you have time." Helen's pulse hammered. She recalled Charlotte's calm, watchful presence at Adrian's side. "Of course," she managed, swallowing hard. "Should we sit in the reading corner?" They settled into two worn armchairs near a fireplace display. Charlotte took in the cozy surroundings, the faint smell of old pages. Her posture remained formal. "I'm here on Adrian's behalf, though he doesn't know I've come." Helen stiffened, dread coiling in her gut. "How is he?" Charlotte sighed, removing her glasses and wiping them with a small cloth. "He's not well. He's thrown himself into work, cancelled the surgery for now, and refuses to talk about anything else." She hesitated, voice softening. "I've known Adrian for over a decade. I've never seen him this despondent." Tears pricked Helen's eyes. "I never meant to hurt him. I fell in love with the person he is without planning it." Charlotte studied her face, as though parsing sincerity. Finally, she spoke. "Adrian's mother passed away when he was a teenager, and his father was rarely in the picture. He learned early not to trust easily. When Rachel came into his life, he believed he'd found acceptance despite his blindness." Her voice turned brittle. "Now he feels utterly betrayed." Helen covered her mouth, her remorse choking her. "I know. I'd do anything to undo what I've done." Charlotte's gaze flickered. "Perhaps you can't undo it, but you might help him heal by offering an explanation." "He shut you out before you could fully explain." Helen's breath caught. "He told me to leave. Does he even want to hear from me again?" Charlotte sighed. "I'm not certain. But if you truly care for him, you owe him the whole truth about your sister, your family, everything. He's overshadowed by anger and pain, but part of him might still be open to hearing your side." Helen felt an odd mix of hope and despair. She'd believed Adrian would never speak to her again, but if Charlotte was nudging her to try... "I don't even know if my words will matter now," she murmured. "They might," Charlotte said gently, "or they might not. But he's locked away in that mansion, ignoring calls that aren't strictly business. If you want any chance of atonement, go and face him." Heart pounding, Helen fiddled with the hem of her sweater. "My family is still pressuring me to get him to help with their debts. I can't bring that up now. I refuse. He's already been used enough." Charlotte stood, sliding her glasses back on. "Then don't ask. Adrian's well-being must come first. If he decides to help your family later, that's his choice, but you have to let go of that burden. You'll find no path forward if you keep tangling his finances with your heartbreak." Helen rose as well, tears glistening. "Thank you for telling me all this. I might try to see him, but I don't want to force my presence on him if it only causes more pain." Charlotte placed a reassuring hand on Helen's shoulder. "Adrian is strong, but even strong men can shatter under enough heartbreak. If you love him, go carefully, but go." With that, she walked out, leaving the door chime echoing in her wake. Helen sank back into the armchair, heart pounding. She thought of Adrian alone in that grand mansion, cancelling the surgery that once filled him with hope, wandering the hallways in darkness deeper than before. She glanced around her beloved bookstore, her sanctuary, and realized it no longer felt like enough. If there was a chance to help Adrian heal, she had to try, even if it meant facing his anger all over again, even if it meant failing. She owed him that much, at least. Helen parked her car on a side street near Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago, her heart thudding so loudly she could hardly think. It was early morning, the sky painted in soft oranges and pinks. Despite his recent decision to postpone, Adrian had apparently rescheduled his surgery for today, thanks to Dr. Grant's persuasion. She learned this through a fleeting text from Charlotte. He changed his mind, arrives at 6 a.m. Helen slipped through the hospital's automatic doors, the crisp scent of disinfectant mingling with her panic. People bustled in scrubs and white coats, but no one stopped her. She found her way to the ophthalmology wing on the 3rd floor, where a handful of weary-looking patients waited in plastic chairs. Her gaze darted around, and there he was, seated in a corner with Charlotte by his side, speaking quietly with Dr. Maxwell Grant. Adrian wore a simple button-down shirt and dark slacks, his posture resigned. Tension etched his features. Even from across the room, Helen sensed the swirl of emotions contained within him. When Charlotte noticed Helen, she offered a small nod but made no move to intervene. Helen's legs felt leaden as she approached them. She cleared her throat softly. "Adrian?" He stiffened. Slowly, he turned his head toward her voice, eyes still unfocused. For an agonizing moment, no one spoke. Then Dr. Grant offered a gentle, "I'll give you two a moment," before stepping away with Charlotte. Helen stood before Adrian, her heart in her throat. She saw the hurt scarring his features, a wariness that cut deeper than she'd ever witnessed. "How did you know I was here?" he asked, voice guarded. "I heard from Charlotte you changed your mind about the surgery," she murmured. "I wanted to see how you're doing." He let out a dry laugh. "How do you think I'm doing? I'm here for a last-chance operation to regain partial vision after discovering my wife was an imposter." "Not exactly a story that inspires confidence." Helen's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry. Words aren't enough. I know. But I came because you shouldn't go through this alone." He pressed his lips together. "I'm not alone," he said, voice clipped. "Charlotte's here. Dr. Grant is here. I'll manage." She swallowed hard. "Adrian, I know you have no reason to believe me, but you matter to me. You have from the start, even before I was honest about my identity. You can send me away, but I'll still be here in the waiting room, praying for the surgery's success." Adrian's breath caught, anger flashing in his pale eyes. "Stop acting like you care," he said, though his voice trembled. "You fooled me once. Isn't that enough?" Tears blurred her vision. "I only fooled you about my name, about being Rachel. But every shared moment, the reading, our conversations, that was me. Helen, I never lied about how I felt." He rose unsteadily, gripping his folded cane. "I can't do this now. The nurse is expecting me for pre-op." He tapped his cane once, and a nurse, noticing, hurried over. Helen stepped aside, her heart cracking all over again. Dr. Grant returned, offering Adrian a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Without another glance, Adrian allowed the nurse to guide him down the hallway to the prep area. Charlotte approached Helen, her expression torn. "He's hurting," she whispered, "but at least you spoke. That might help, even if it doesn't seem so." Helen nodded numbly. "I'll wait. Tell me where the waiting room is, and I'll be there until it's over." Charlotte placed a hand on Helen's arm. "This surgery will take hours. He may not even want to see you afterward." Helen drew a shuddering breath. "I know. But if there's the slightest chance, I have to stay. Even if he refuses to face me, I'll be there for him, in whatever way I can." Charlotte led her to a small, impersonal waiting area with worn chairs and a vending machine humming in the corner. As Helen sank into a seat, the reality of what lay ahead pressed on her. If the surgery went well, Adrian might see again. He'd see the face of the woman who tricked him. If it failed, he'd remain in darkness. Neither outcome would erase her betrayal. The hours ticked by in excruciating slowness. Helen sipped stale coffee, stared at motivational posters on pastel walls, and replayed every memory with Adrian, his gentle laughter, the way he reached for her hand. That was what she clung to, the hope that just maybe he'd understand someday that beneath the lie was a genuine love. A nurse passed by occasionally with updates. They're still working. It's going as planned. Each time, Helen's heart squeezed with a mixture of dread and fragile hope. If Adrian succeeded in regaining his vision, it would be a miracle. But the real question loomed like an ominous shadow. Would seeing her clearly drive him away forever? Helen lost track of how many cups of coffee she'd consumed by the time Dr. Grant finally emerged. The corridor's fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow on his weary face. She jolted upright, nearly spilling the lukewarm coffee in her trembling hand. Charlotte, seated beside her, rose as well. "How is he?" Helen managed, voice tight with anxiety. Dr. Grant offered a tired but reassuring smile. "The procedure went smoothly. He's stable. It'll take time, days, maybe weeks, to know the full extent of vision recovery. But the initial signs are positive." Relief, warm and dizzying, flooded Helen. She closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer of thanks. "Can I see him?" A flicker of concern crossed Dr. Grant's features. "He's in recovery, heavily sedated. When he wakes, he might be disoriented. Given the circumstances, I'm not sure he'll want visitors." Helen nodded, swallowing back tears. She understood. But an hour later, after Dr. Grant checked on Adrian's vitals, Charlotte returned to the waiting area. "He's awake," she said quietly, "and asking for me. You can come with me if you wish, but be prepared that he might tell you to leave." Helen's heart thudded. She braced herself and followed Charlotte to a private room. The rhythmic beeping of monitors accompanied the gentle hum of an IV. Adrian lay in the bed, bandages covering part of his forehead and temple, protective patches taped over his eyes. A nurse hovered by his side, adjusting an IV drip. At the sound of footsteps, Adrian turned his head slightly. "Charlotte," he asked, voice raspy from anesthesia. "I'm here," she said gently. "Helen's with me." He tensed visibly. For a moment, no one spoke. The nurse finished her check and slipped out. Finally, Adrian let out a shaky breath. "Fine," he muttered. "I can manage a conversation." Charlotte murmured something about giving them privacy, then left. Helen approached cautiously, fear and hope clashing in her chest. She saw faint tremors in his fingers as he gripped the bedsheets. "Adrian," she began, "I'm so glad you're okay." He swallowed, lips pressed tight. "Dr. Grant says there's a chance I'll see again. Partially. Could be weeks before we remove all these dressings. Everything is hazy now." He paused, a bitter note creeping into his voice. "It's ironic. I've dreamed of seeing you, Rachel, or whoever you are, but now I'm not sure I want to." Tears slipped down Helen's cheeks. "I understand," she whispered, moving closer. Gently, she rested a hand on the mattress near his arm, not daring to touch him without permission. "Adrian, all I want is for you to heal and be happy, whether you ever forgive me or not. That's up to you." He let out a low, humorless laugh. "Forgiveness, as I lay on that operating table, drifting off, I kept thinking about how every single memory I cherished was a lie. But then I recalled the night you read poetry to me, or the time we made pasta together. Those felt real. I can't reconcile the two." His voice broke slightly. "I'm angry, but I'm also confused." Helen's own emotions threatened to swallow her. "I lied about my identity, about being Rachel, but I never lied about the parts of me that laughed with you, learned from you, cared for you, and I never lied about—" her voice caught, "about loving you." Adrian's hand shifted slightly on the bed, fingers trembling. She ached to hold it, but didn't dare unless he chose to reach for her. Instead, she waited, heart pounding. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he exhaled shakily. "I'm too tired to figure this out now. My head hurts, my eyes hurt, everything hurts." She wiped her tears. "Rest. I won't push you. I'll step out and—" "Stay," he murmured, nearly inaudible. "Just don't speak. Let me think. If I want you to leave, I'll say so." A flicker of hope pierced her sorrow. She gently lowered herself into the chair beside his bed. Silence stretched, punctuated by the monitor's beeping and the soft shuffle of hospital staff in the hall. In that quiet moment, Helen recalled the vow Adrian had repeated so often, that once he could see again, he wanted to look upon his wife's face. Now, the future hung in the balance. If his vision returned, he'd see a woman he both cherished and despised. Everything had changed, and yet a fragile thread of connection remained. She settled in, prepared for a long wait. Outside, evening shadows lengthened, and nurses flickered in and out for routine checks. Adrian drifted between wakefulness and sleep, occasionally wincing from pain or medication. Through it all, Helen stayed, hardly daring to move. She prayed that when he finally opened his eyes to the world, he'd find it in his heart to grant her a second chance, no matter how slim that hope might be. Helen sat on the edge of the guest bed in her parents' Lake Forest mansion, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Outside the window, early morning light cast long shadows across the manicured lawn and perfectly trimmed hedges, an illusion of stability that no longer existed. Today, she and Adrian had agreed to meet her family here. She could hardly believe he had agreed to come at all. A week had passed since Adrian's surgery. The protective patches were removed 2 days prior, and he was able to distinguish light, shadow, and blurred shapes if he stood close enough. Although he still relied partly on his cane and memorized paths, the partial sight offered a timid glimpse of a world he hadn't seen in years. For Helen, it represented both hope and dread. Soon, he'd be able to see her face clearly for the first time. She heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Her heart lurched. Adrian had refused to let her ride with him, insisting he arrive under his own power. She pressed her palm to her chest, willing her pulse to slow. They needed to confront the Morgan family's lies and manipulations, to lay everything out once and for all. Even if it tore them apart, the truth had to be acknowledged. Evelyn Morgan appeared at the doorway, hair styled into a perfect blonde bob, her expression tense. "Helen," she said tersely, "your father and I have been waiting in the sitting room. Adrian just arrived. Let's not draw this out." Helen rose, nerves making her knees waver. She followed her mother downstairs, through the wide hallway lined with portraits of Morgan ancestors. As they neared the sitting room, she spotted Adrian, cane in hand, carefully navigating the last few steps. He paused, tilting his head as if listening for some familiar sound. A flicker of recognition crossed his face when Helen stepped forward. He could make out her silhouette, at least, if not her details. Evelyn cleared her throat. "Adrian, thank you for coming. Robert's in the study. He'll be out in a moment. Rachel, well, she's here too." Adrian nodded stiffly. "I'm only here because Helen said we needed to resolve unfinished business." His voice was calm, but Helen sensed the resentment beneath. Helen guided him into the sitting room, making sure he avoided the edge of a side table. He accepted her assistance with a reluctant inclination of his head. Across the room, Rachel stood near the fireplace, hands protectively clasped over her barely visible baby bump. She looked both defiant and afraid. Robert Morgan emerged from the study, shoulders slumped as though carrying the weight of a lifetime of poor decisions. Nobody spoke for a long moment, tension electrifying the air. Finally, Helen inhaled deeply, deciding she couldn't let the silence drag on. "Mom, Dad, Rachel," she began, voice trembling. "Adrian knows everything about how I pretended to be Rachel and about the family debts. He wants to address it openly." Evelyn's eyes flicked nervously to Adrian. "We never intended to trick you," she said, her tone wavering between defiance and regret. "We were desperate, and Rachel vanished at the worst time." Adrian's jaw tightened. "So you decided it was fine to substitute one daughter for another, as if people are interchangeable?" His voice was measured, but anger simmered. "If you'd approached me honestly about your financial troubles, I might have helped. But you chose deception." Robert cleared his throat. "We feared you'd cancel the wedding if you knew Rachel was gone. Adrian cut him off. "I would have cancelled the wedding. Of course I would. But I might still have offered assistance in some form, or at least you could have respected me enough to be honest. Instead, you robbed me of my right to choose." A prickling silence followed. Helen saw the flicker of shame cross her father's face. He lowered his gaze. "We didn't see another way," he murmured. Then Rachel spoke, voice trembling. "I'm the one who ran away. I caused this chain of events. I was never in love with you, Adrian. You seemed fine with an arrangement that benefited us both, until you lost your sight and everything changed. I realized I couldn't go through with it. And now, I'm pregnant with someone else's child." She swallowed hard. "I truly am sorry." Adrian steadied himself, leaning on the cane. Helen's hand hovered near his arm, offering support he might or might not accept. "I can't say I forgive you," he said to Rachel, "but thank you for admitting it." Robert spoke up again, desperation edging his tone. "What happens now? Will you help us?" Adrian turned his head slightly, as though trying to focus. "Help? That depends on a lot of things. Helen and I are still resolving our own issues. If you're hoping for a free pass, you've come to the wrong person." Evelyn paled, but she said nothing. The Morgan family's future hung in the balance, just like Helen's fragile relationship with Adrian. The old mansion's antique clock chimed, echoing through the tense silence. For the first time in years, everything was laid bare. The debts, the manipulations, the betrayals. Helen swallowed the lump in her throat. She had no idea how or if they would repair this damage. All she knew was that a single deception had changed all their lives forever. 2 days after the tense showdown in Lake Forest, Helen stared at the newly repainted sign outside her beloved bookstore, Pages and Memories. She'd spent the morning up on a ladder, touching up the lettering that had faded over time. A light drizzle had started, making the paint glisten under grey skies. There was something reassuring about tending to these small tasks, grounding her in a reality she still controlled. Inside, the shop felt cozier than usual, the faint smell of rain mixing with the comforting scent of old books. A handful of customers wandered the aisles. At the register, Emily Torres, Helen's new assistant who had partial visual impairment, chatted with a regular about an upcoming reading event. Helen felt a spark of pride seeing Emily's enthusiasm. Helen worked her way through the back shelves, making space for a new section dedicated to Braille and audiobooks. Despite everything happening with Adrian, she'd pressed on with the idea of creating a more inclusive environment. She wanted to honor the part of Adrian's legacy that had become so important to her, no matter how things ended between them. A jingle at the door made her glance up. Adrian stood in the entryway, cane in hand, eyes still adjusting to the partial vision from his recent surgery. Helen's breath caught. She hadn't expected him. The tension she'd felt since the confrontation with her family flared in her chest. She squared her shoulders and approached cautiously. He offered a faint smile, still guarded, as though trying to decipher her silhouette. I heard you were adding new Braille books, he said quietly. Charlotte forwarded me the store's social media update. Helen's throat tightened. Yes, I wanted to stock them for our visually impaired community. Many people don't realize how scarce Braille options can be in independent bookstores. He nodded, taking a step forward. She noticed how he still used his cane to navigate, but his gaze flicked around more confidently than before. The surgery had restored enough sight for him to see broad shapes and contrasts, though not details. If he got close enough, he might glimpse the outlines of her face, the woman he'd known by voice and touch alone. This place is different than I pictured, he admitted, voice subdued. It feels inviting, warm. Helen's heart clenched. It always felt like home to me, she said softly, leading him deeper into the store. She paused by a shelf of new Braille volumes. I wanted to create a corner for reading sessions, once a week or so, for anyone who wants to read aloud or listen. Adrian traced the Braille labels on the spine of a book, lips parting in mild surprise. You've really gone all in on this idea, haven't you? She nodded, then remembered to speak so he'd know. Yes, and I'd like to do more. Maybe partner with your foundation, if you still want. I understand if you'd prefer not to get involved. Adrian's expression flickered with conflict. The foundation isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone working to improve accessibility. We can talk about collaboration. But first, I need to know something. He swallowed. Was any of this done just to win back my favor or to atone for the lie? Helen shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. It began because I cared for you, but it's grown into something beyond just you or me. It's about helping others who need it. I want to keep doing that, whatever happens between us. Silence stretched. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes downcast. I'm still angry, he admitted in a raw tone. I'm still hurt, but I also miss you, the person I got to know, the one who shared my love of books and who listened when I talked about my regrets. I can't just erase that. Helen's tears threatened to spill over. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the blurred shape of her face. She hesitated, then reached out, letting her fingertips hover near his arm. If you want a chance to rebuild on honest terms, I'm here. But I understand if you need more time. He nodded slowly, tension radiating from him like a taut wire. Then, with a cautious motion, he placed his hand over hers. For the first time since her confession, their touch felt voluntary on both sides. No deception, no forced pretense. All right, he murmured, voice catching slightly. Let's take it one day at a time, see what's possible without lies. A watery smile curved Helen's lips. She led him to a quiet nook near the store's reading corner, where soft armchairs waited by a small fireplace. Outside, the drizzle pattered against the windows. Inside, surrounded by shelves of stories and the warmth of possibility, they settled side by side. They didn't solve all their issues in that moment, but it was a beginning, a fragile step toward restoring trust that both had feared was lost forever. A full year passed after Helen's first brave step in reconciling with Adrian. She stood on the porch of the newly renovated mansion by Lake Geneva, gazing out at the calm waters, reflecting a brilliant summer sunset. Gone were the silent, forlorn halls that once harbored secrets and lies. In their place, fresh paint, updated furnishings, and a sense of life breathed vibrancy into the old estate. Helen turned to peer through the open French doors, listening to the gentle hum of a gathering inside. Adrian had invited a small group of friends, including Charlotte, Dr. Grant, and Emily, to celebrate the launch of a new initiative, a mobile bookstore and literacy outreach program for rural communities. He'd asked Helen to helm it, merging her bookstore's passion with the foundation's resources. Her heart fluttered at the thought of how far they'd come. Adrian's partial vision had stabilized over the months. He could now read large print letters up close and discern people's faces when they stood nearby. He still relied on a cane and adaptive technology, but the progress had gifted him greater independence. She sensed him approach from behind, footsteps soft on the porch's wooden boards. Turning, she smiled as he stepped within a few feet, enough to see the contours of her face. "Sneaking a quiet moment away?" he teased gently. Helen let out a soft laugh. "Yes, I still can't believe we got everything done in time." She motioned to the mansion's interior, where laughter and conversation mingled. Warm lights glowing over the living room's new bookcases. "It's been a whirlwind." Adrian nodded, touching her arm. She gave him her full attention, noticing how the last rays of sunshine caught the silver highlights at his temples. "This house finally feels like home," he said, voice reflective, "because it isn't just mine anymore. We've both poured ourselves into it." A warm flush spread through Helen's chest. Months of therapy sessions, heartfelt conversations, and mutual apologies had brought them to a place where they could stand side by side without guilt overshadowing every glance. She confronted her family's manipulations too. Though her parents were still paying off debts, Adrian had offered a fair financial arrangement that secured the bookstore's future without enabling continued deceit. Evelyn and Robert had, in turn, ceased their desperate meddling in Helen's life. The question of Rachel's future loomed early on, but she'd chosen to move to a quieter suburb near Chicago, focusing on her pregnancy and ultimately giving birth to a baby boy. Occasional messages reached Helen, hinting at Rachel's slow growth toward maturity, though the sisters still navigated a fragile reconciliation. Now, as evening settled, the air carried a soft tang of Lake Geneva's breeze. Helen leaned against the porch railing, eyes drifting to the horizon's gradient of oranges and pinks. "Sometimes I think about how different life would be if you hadn't come into it," she murmured, remembering the day she first stepped into his orbit under false pretenses. "I thought I was doomed to be a footnote in my own family's story. And then everything changed." Adrian slipped an arm around her waist, a gesture that still felt surreal in its tenderness. "I used to believe my life had ended with my accident," he said quietly. "That I was destined to live in the shadows, always angry at what I lost. Even after meeting Rachel, I felt uncertain. But you, Helen, helped me see more clearly than I ever had before." She blinked back tears, touched by the sincerity in his words. "You helped me find my voice. For so long, I let my family's needs and Rachel's glamour overshadow my own dreams." He brushed a light kiss against her temple, then pulled back slightly so his restored sight could settle on her face. Though blurred, she knew he could see the curve of her smile, the gentle tilt of her head. "Shall we go back in?" he suggested with a grin. "Our guests are probably wondering where the hosts went." Helen took his hand, and they stepped indoors where friends chatted amid trays of hors d'oeuvres, the cozy hum of a gathering that felt both intimate and celebratory. The library corner glowed under soft lamps, symbolizing all that they'd built: a shared love of books, a mutual commitment to accessible reading, and a life founded on truth instead of illusion. They lingered among friends who congratulated Helen on her new outreach program and teased Adrian about adjusting to half-vision in a world that seemed bigger every day. The home rang with easy laughter. In that moment, Helen realized something profound. They were no longer bound by a lie that defined their meeting. Instead, they were forging a new chapter, together on equal ground. A chapter where they each chose the other, day after day, not out of desperation or fear, but from a sense of genuine belonging and love. Late summer sunshine streamed through the tall windows of pages and memories, casting dancing patterns of light onto the newly polished floor. Today marked the 5th anniversary of the store's expansion into Braille and audiobooks, and the official rebranding to Visions and Pages. The sign outside bore the updated name in both print and Braille, a testament to how far Helen and Adrian had come. Helen finished straightening a small display of commemorative bookmarks showcasing raised lettering for the visually impaired. Her gaze drifted to the cozy reading corner, remembering how uncertain she'd felt the first time she'd set it up. Now, it was a lively, welcoming space where readers of all abilities gathered. Across the store, Adrian stood chatting with a group of enthusiastic teens who had come for the day's workshops. He wore a casual button-down, sleeves rolled, a contented smile on his face as he answered their questions about adaptive reading technology. Though he still navigated with a cane, his partial vision was enough to make eye contact with people at close range. Each day, he seemed more at ease in this world he could partly see and fully embrace. A burst of laughter carried from the group, and Helen's heart swelled. She never tired of watching Adrian in these moments. The man who once isolated himself in a lakeside mansion, now happily mentoring young people. The store had become a shared mission, an extension of both the Foundation's outreach and Helen's lifelong love of books. Eventually, the workshop ended and the teens waved goodbye. Adrian made his way toward Helen, cane tapping lightly, but his eyes locked on her silhouette well before he reached her. He paused, close enough to see her features in the warm afternoon light. "You look radiant," he murmured. She blushed, adjusting a lock of hair behind her ear. "You can actually see me, at least a little." He grinned. "Yes. And you're as beautiful as I imagined back in the days I could only rely on my hands to learn your face." Helen's cheeks warmed further. She remembered that time vividly, how he'd touched her features gently, never suspecting she wasn't the bride he'd been promised. Now she stood before him as herself, confident in the knowledge that their bond was forged on truth. "It's been quite a journey," she said softly, her eyes flicking to the store's bustling interior. He nodded, a nostalgic glint in his gaze. "Remember when this store was just a small neighborhood bookstore? You dreamed of preserving it as your family's legacy. Now, you've turned it into a beacon for people who thought reading wasn't for them." Helen exhaled, a soft smile tugging her lips. "And you've redirected part of your fortune to research on visual impairment and expanding literacy programs. We're really doing this, together." Just then, a familiar voice piped up behind them. "Helen, the afternoon read aloud is starting soon. Should we set out extra chairs?" It was Emily, her assistant, now managing a small staff of her own. She had a bright expression, a testament to the empowerment she'd found working here. Helen nodded. "Yes, please." "Thanks, Emily." As Emily bustled off, Adrian drew Helen aside. "I have something for you," he said, lowering his voice. Fishing a slim volume from his messenger bag, he handed it to her. The cover bore a simple title in both print and Braille, "Seeing Twice, a Memoir." Her eyes rounded. You wrote this," she breathed, running her fingertips over the raised lettering. She noticed his initials, A.R., embossed on the corner. "I did," he confirmed, a hint of nervousness coloring his smile. "It's about my journey, losing my sight, meeting you, learning to see in a new way. I dedicated it to the woman who taught me that true vision starts in the heart." A lump formed in Helen's throat. She traced the words with trembling hands. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice husky with emotion. "This means so much." He rested a gentle hand on hers. "You gave me more than just a reason to hope. You helped me rebuild my life around compassion, not pride. That's what I wanted to capture in this book. Tears blurred Helen's vision. She blinked them away, remembering the lonely, guilt-ridden woman she'd been when she first arrived at his doorstep, masquerading as Rachel. Now she stood with him as Helen Morgan, his partner in life, in love, and in their shared mission for literacy. She rose onto her tiptoes, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me see the world twice, once through my own eyes and once through yours." A tender silence enveloped them, broken only by the distant chatter of book lovers in the aisle. Together, they turned toward the reading corner, where a new group of visitors had gathered, eager for the afternoon session. Stepping forward in unison, they joined the circle, an emblem of everything they'd built: trust, empathy, and a vision that transcended any limitation of sight. Far from the days of secrecy and shame, Helen and Adrian now embraced life with clarity of purpose and open hearts. And as Helen opened the memoir to read an excerpt aloud, she caught Adrian's warm gaze on her, his partial vision shining with pride. In that moment, she saw clearly their love story, once founded on lies, had finally arrived in its truest, most brilliant form, no longer shaped by darkness, but by a shared light they had kindled together. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.